Call the meeting to order. Need a motion to approve the agenda.
I so move. David?
Seconder.
Second. Dave Moore.
Moved and seconded. Question? All in favor?
Aye.
We have an agenda. Conflict of interest, if any. We do have regrets from Director Hicks, out of town, so. We're going to move directly on to the Finance Committee overview. I guess a couple of words from me before we start. The job of this committee initially is to work through the draft budget and to look at where there may be issues that need more explanation, more clarity, or where we want input, and basically to prepare to move everything into the committee of the whole in the next. When we're ready to move it on, it shouldn't take too much time to get through it, but we may have some issues that we want to deal with before. As always, in committee, there are no motions. We'll work through consensus and get an idea of when we can move out of a subject and move on from there, or what we want to, I guess in this case, raise as individuals at the committee of the whole when we move forward. I guess that's pretty well it. Moving on to, okay.
Thank you.
She'll give you a more complete overview of what the committee can do.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'm supposed to go to the podium, so I'll go right there. So before we get into the budget, we thought it would be useful, since this is our first meeting as a new finance committee, to give you an overview of the responsibilities of the finance committee. And as our chair said, the first responsibility is going to be for reviewing, receiving, and making recommendations to the board on the budget. That usually happens in August. So we have presented a draft budget as staff, which we're going to go through today. And then it will be vetted by the committee. Any questions that are necessary are asked. Any changes that you would like to see can be adopted here. And then once the finance committee reaches consensus, that becomes the finance committee's budget, which is forwarded on to the committee of the whole. So that's point 2 in the duties of the finance committee. The first one that you'll see there is to coordinate estimates of revenues and expenditures for recommendation to the board. That has to do with our year-end estimates. So in December, if you've been around this board before, you'll know that we prepare estimates of where we think each of our funds are going to finish. And then we recommend reserve fund transfers. So that's what that point has to do with. The third is to consider requests for expenditures exceeding those provided in the annual budget. So if there's something that comes up during the year that is outside or above staff approval for their spending limits, that would be brought to this finance committee for then recommendation to the board if they so choose. It also includes approving annual tenders that are above staff limits. The fourth point would be providing advice and preparing recommendations for the board on all matters regarding capital funding. So that would be borrowing, as it particularly relates to the solid waste facility. And typically this is done in the annual budget. So when we look at the solid waste budget, we will see that we're recommending borrowing for 2 pieces of equipment, and that is going to be presented to you today. The next responsibility is development of short and long-term financial planning for the commission. So that would be the annual budget, as well as looking more long-term, which would be in the 3 to 5 year time frame. Additionally, you monitor and report on quarterly financial performance, and you monitor that, and that's done on a quarterly basis. And the next one would be our Q3, which would finish in September. So we'll bring that to the finance committee in October, and you can ask any questions at that point. And then the last duty is to ensure that the acquisition and disposal of property is carried out in terms of policy directives issued by the board. So the capital would be at the solid waste facility, capitalize and dispose of that, and you're responsible for ensuring that's carried out. Our policy is in accordance with the province, when PSAT was adopted in 2012. So today we're going to focus on the budget process. And a lot of this information is what you have heard before, and we did focus on some of this in our orientation session as well. So with regard to our budget process, I've said this numerous times, but our primary goal is always to ensure stable and predictable fees for communities and businesses. In our solid waste facility, 60% of our tonnage actually comes from our business sector, so that's why we include businesses in there. And our annual budget is never prepared in isolation. We're always looking to the future to see what that impact will be on future years. We take a conservative approach when it comes to budgeting. We want to make sure that we're not overestimating our revenues or underestimating our expenses. And that's why we have a strong history of operating surpluses in our various funds. And this is not lost when we have a surplus. What happens if we do have a surplus in a various fund? It comes in the second next in super year, or you'll hear us refer to that as second previous year surplus. So even when we have a surplus, it's going to give us credit in 2 years' time. So that funding allows us to keep number fees down. We talked about this in orientation as well, but there are two sets of accounting standards that we must report under. The Municipal Financial Reporting Manual, the province of New Brunswick, is what the budget is prepared under. And then we have to take that and convert it to PSAS, or Public Sector Accounting Standards, for our annual audited financial statements. When you look at the budget, we also have two templates that we use. So the budget that was distributed to you this past week is our internal budget template. And it's often people find it easier to understand as we're able to provide explanations, show differences. So that's why we prepare that and we present that to the committee and the board. And then there's the provincial budget template. And that is the budget that's actually distributed to our municipalities as well as on the website. So I'm going to just get Kelly to bring that up so you can see. Because I know in the past there has been some confusion. People see that budget, the provincial budget template, and they're like, this is not the budget that we reviewed. It is the budget you reviewed. It's just taken from one format and moved to the format that we have to look for. Kelly's going to bring that up just so you're familiar with it. If you've never seen it. So this is the format that the province requires us to submit budget in. And as you scroll through, you'll see that it does have all the various funds that we're going to review today. You can see all local planning, solid waste, power generation. I'm just going to get you, Kelly, to jump into this page here. Okay. So I know this is very small and it's hard to see, but basically what this does is it takes the budget that you're reviewing today that's under municipal standards, and it converts it to PSAS. So it puts in things that shouldn't be there for PSAS, and it takes out things that shouldn't, or vice versa. So if you skip to the next page, so what we're reviewing today is a balanced budget. So every fund has a zero surplus or deficit. In reality, when we take the budget that we're reviewing, it usually ends up in a deficit budget for PSAS. So if you look at that very last column, it says negative 222. So a balanced budget under municipal standards becomes a deficit budget under PSAS because of the different things that can be included. So I just wanted to point that out. Thanks, Kelly. And if you are interested in seeing that template a little bit further, you can go on our website. 2026 budget is there. And when the board recommends forwarding the 2027 draft budget, it will also be posted to our website. So operating reserves, we talked about our reserve fund policy that was adopted last year. Many of you were a part of that. It sets targets for what each of the fund's operating reserve levels should be. If you've been around, you know that we do have some operating reserves that are overfunded or they're well above the target. What we've recommended for our 2027 budget is to use some of these overfunded to keep our member fees down. So when we review those budgets, you're going to see a transfer from operating reserve. That's to get that reserve fund down to the target and give you a break on your member fees. So that includes funds for cooperative and regional planning, regional transportation services, as well as public safety committee. Capital reserves, again, we've talked about this and the importance of building up our capital reserves. And I'm going to specifically focus on solid waste services because you are going to see an amount transfer to capital reserve. We are in a building phase of building up our reserve funds. Our target level is 9.6 million right now. And the reason for that is we do have some significant costs that are going to be coming up in the next 5 years. So we know that our baling facility is going to need to be refitted or maybe a brand new facility. I don't know how you would describe that, Brad, but he's going to talk about that a bit more. And that's coming up in about 5 years' time. So it is important for us to be in a position where we can pay for a portion of that building at that time, because we will not have the capacity to borrow for 100% of those costs. So we are putting money aside today to be in that position. The other thing that's impacting our reserve fund levels is our cell development costs. So currently we are piggybacking on our cells that were already constructed, so it's much less cost for the landfill. We're spending about 100,000 on cell development currently. When we reach final elevation on those cells, there are going to be significant costs to go into another area of the landfill to develop those cells because of where they are and the excavation that's required with regard to those cell development. So basically, while we're paying 100,000 now for cell development, those costs are going to be between $1 million and $3 million per cell to develop at that time. So we are preparing for those costs, and that's part of why we need that $9.6 million in that capital reserve fund. So that gives you kind of an overview of what's driving us with the budget this year. Are there any questions with regard to responsibilities before I get into the budget?
Questions for Mary Kay? Okay.
All right, we'll get right into the numbers then. So by way of overview, just so there's no surprises, this is what the budget's going to look like. Our member charges for our newer services, which is the services we began in 2023, we're proposing an increase to those member charges, which would be your municipal charges, by $4,657. So a small increase. Last year, we were able to decrease them by $46,000. We're proposing a small increase this year. That's about 0.2% for an increase, keeping in mind that inflation right now is 3.8%. So we've been very conscious of keeping those down. We've done our best to look at all areas where we can save money to pass that on to the members. For planning and development, we're proposing an increase to participating member charges, keeping in mind not all municipalities do receive this service. Some have their own planning and development departments, so they do not receive their services from us. But we're proposing an increase of just over 200,000 with regard to that service. We'll talk about what's driving that as we get into that budget. And then for our solid waste tipping fee, which is our garbage tipping fee, we're proposing a $3 increase, which would result in a tipping fee amount of $112 per ton. And that's about a 2.75% increase. So the first budget that we always look at is our corporate services. And just to refresh your memory, corporate services are expenses that support the entire commission. They're not specific to any division. So what happens is we have a budget for those, and that budget then gets allocated out to all the various divisions to pay for. What's driving our changes in 2027 is we had an increase to our IT support costs, so that it would be in line with what we are actually spending. We have adjusted our rental costs, so you'll remember we did take some additional space last year. That was not reflected in our 2026 budget, so it had to be increased in 2027. And we did have a one-time cost in 2026 for the cost to set up this boardroom. That's been eliminated, so there's a little bit of savings there. So this is our internal template. And I'll just take a second to explain it if you're not familiar with it. We have the description, we have the last year's budget, which was 2026. Our proposed 2027 budget shows you what the difference is, whether it's positive or negative, up or down, and then the percentage difference. And we try to provide an explanation if there is a specific reason as to why we're changing from what it has been previously. So for salaries and benefits, we have a total budget in corporate services of 1.2 million. That's actually down from previous years. And the reason for that is we did remove one part-time position, which resulted in those savings. On the governance, which would be our board expenses, we have a budget of 139,000. That's up 1,700 from the previous year, and that's due because board members' honorariums are adjusted for inflation annually, which we've assumed at 3% for 2026. And lastly, for corporate services, we have our administration. So if you look at the total administration expenses, we have a budget of 567,000. That's up 43,000 from the previous year. And like I mentioned, our IT support, that's up 10,000. Our office equipment and supplies, that's down 12,500 because there was a one-time cost in 2026. And then our rent cost is up 37,000 because of that additional space that was taken on. So overall, the budget for corporate services is 1,915,000, or an increase of 28,000 or 1.5%. And as I mentioned, you're going to see that 1.95 million divided out over the various divisions to pay for as a line item, which we'll see in the next budget. Maybe I'll pause after every budget and give an opportunity for questions.
So the transfers out of the operating reserves will be a one move across from the particular reserves.
That's correct, yeah, for those particular budgets, three that we mentioned.
Okay, I think a question that will come up there is, how does that impact us in 2028?
That's a great question, and I'll show you in cooperative and regional planning how I think it will probably impact. All right.
So if you do have any questions as we're moving along, let us know.
Just
I'm sensing one.
well, maybe more than one. On procedure, so we're having this meeting today, this is the first look. Do we anticipate that we're gonna have a subsequent meeting?
I would anticipate we
Before
will
we
have
go to
subsequent
committee of the
meetings,
whole?
maybe more than one, to look at areas where we would suggest changes or modifications. Understanding that the total piece can still go, when we go back to committee of the whole, we will inform the board where we have made modifications, so they're aware of all.
So I guess, yeah, so that in the interest of time and everything, I think I'll hold my questions back. I'll put them in the form of written questions and submit them to the whole committee, and then maybe it won't put you on the spot to try and answer some of the questions right away, and I think some of them might be difficult to answer. I think I'd prefer to do that.
The more we get, the more that we accomplish here,
Yeah,
the less time we'll be spending in committee of the whole, and easier it will be to
Yeah.
explain the issues that we have identified or not. So,
and it just as an example, I'm looking at honorary names and it's not a huge increase. But I'm assuming that that's set by bylaw, so it might, it might generate a different discussion. If we wanna revisit the honorary thing, we really would need to look at it from a bylaw perspective, so not so much a budget.
exactly. I think one of the things that we need to be mindful of here is that if we're not here to do or really suggest modifications to the way the Capital Region Service Commission operates under its bylaw.
Correct.
However, those issues could rise out of our discussion and be dealt with in committee of the whole or deferred. You know, that's what I would see happening. So,
Mr. Chair.
yes, sir.
And Mr. Chair, through you, Director Fox, as much lead time as you could give us on the questions so that we can prepare it, share it quickly, share the responses, would be greatly appreciated.
Do our best.
Alright. Included in your package was just a summary of how these get allocated out, if you find that interesting. I didn't include it in the presentation as it's more just administrative, but that's how it's shared. Just to give you an idea, salaries and benefits, we look at where people spend their time. So if someone's spending their time more on solid base, that's where more of their salaries and benefits gets allocated. Honorariums, we split that evenly because the board deals with all the various divisions. And then administration, we changed our allocation method last year. It's based on percentage share of the budget. So if you have a smaller budget, you take on a smaller percentage of the administration, larger budget has a larger amount. And that seemed to work well for us. So the next budget we'll look at cooperative is cooperative and regional planning. And just if you're not familiar with what cooperative and regional planning is, this is the fund that facilitates cooperations between the members, which includes regional planning discussions. The way that I like to think about it, if it doesn't fall into one of the other buckets, it's going to land here in cooperative and regional planning. So the drivers for 2027, what you're going to see is a smaller surplus from the second previous year. But you're also going to see that something transfer comes in from the operating reserve. So remember, we took it from the surplus in 2025, we put it into the operating reserve. Had we left it alone, it would have flowed through automatically. This just gives the board the opportunity to say, no, I think we want to leave it in the operating reserve, or they can bring it in 2027. That's completely up to whatever the committee wants to recommend. You're also going to see a small increase to the corporate services expense allocation.
And if it could just, if I remember correctly, our operating reserve caps are not the same as the municipal operating reserve cap. There is no cap.
That's exactly right.
Municipally, we have a cap of 5%, but there's no cap. So that's how we can exceed the allocation or the amount of money that we have in operating reserve.
Yeah. CRSC is a little bit different than a municipality in that it has much more funds, operating funds than a municipality. So you'd be able to accumulate a little bit more if all of our funds were joined. Having a small cap of say 5% on public safety amounts to next to nothing. So that's why they've chosen to do it that way. And spoiler alert, there may be some changes coming to your 5% restriction under province's rules. So cooperative and regional planning. I'm going to start with the expenses for these smaller funds because that's really what drives the revenues. So if we start at the expenses, you can see we have $50,000 included for regional planning administration. This is used for updating our strategic plan, implementation guide, things like that. The allocation from corporate services is $256,000. That's up just under $4,000 from the previous year. So overall, our expenses are up 1.3%. Being driven by that increase in allocation from corporate services. When we look at the expenses, and I'll leave member fees till the last because that's really just a derivative of total expenses minus our other sources of revenue. That's what we have to charge the members. So Regional Services Support Fund, which is RSSF, that will cover 50% of our costs. So while where our costs went up a little bit, the support fund can go up 50% of that. Our second previous year surplus, we chose to put the money into the operating reserve, so it went down quite a bit. Had we not done that, we would have had a second previous year surplus of 35,200. So we're pretty much doing the same thing by bringing in that overfunding in the operating reserve for cooperative and regional planning. So that allows us to not have to charge as high member fees if we draw on that, keeping in mind that that's a one-time thing. But if we generate similar surpluses to what we had in the previous year, the pattern should continue. So overall, member fees for cooperative and regional planning under this budget would be $117,961, or an increase of $8,800. All right, the next budget is tourism and promotion. This is a pretty straightforward budget. Our drivers for 2027 is our contract that we have with the city, which requires that there be a CPI adjustment every year to that contract. So we've included that, that's 3.8% increase. And then we've increased the RSSF, which offsets some of the necessary member fee increase. So if you look at expenses, professional services, that 1.6 million, that's up just under 59,000, or the 3.8%, as I mentioned. Our allocation from corporate services is actually down about 1,400. So overall, our budget for regional tourism is 1,743,000, or a 3.4% increase. Jumping up to revenue, you'll see that RSSF covers 50% of those costs, so that's up almost 29,000. Our second previous year surplus is up 2,500, which means the amount that has to come from the members is 868,000, or an increase of 26,000, or 3.1% increase.
And I notice we're using, and I'm sure there's a reason for it, different numbers or percentages for CPI in different parts of the budget.
Yeah, that's a great question. The reason that 3.8% is used here is our contract with the city says that the time frame for the CPI adjustment is June 30th. So we have to use June 30th number. We've used 3% for the remaining, like the CPI adjustment for salaries and honorariums. We are hopeful that CPI will come down by the end of December, and it will only be 3 for 2026. When we get to economic development, it's actually a bit higher for CPI because that contract, the adjustment term is May, and it was high in May. So that's why you're seeing different numbers there.
Thank you very much.
All right, the next budget is economic development. And again, similar to tourism promotion, the contract with Ignite reflects a CPI adjustment, and that's what's included in there. We also had a second previous year surplus that came in 2027's budget. In 2026's budget, it was a small deficit, so that resulted in a little bit of a swing. So if you look at the expenses, you can see professional services. The total budget is 2.4 million. That reflects the CPI increase of, I believe it was 4.7. And it also includes the pedal funding. So the pedal funding above matches the expense below. It's a flow through for our workforce labor force contract. So that's why you're seeing an increase here. And then we have no second previous year deficit. Our allocation from corporate services was up 4,400. So overall, our expenses for economic development were 2.583 million, or an increase of 100,000, which is 4.1%. The funding that we receive on economic development, as I mentioned, we have that pedal funding, which is for workforce labor force. We have RSSF, which covers 50% of our contract with Ignite. That's 872,000. We have our second previous year surplus that comes in at 7,200, meaning that our member charges have to be 865,429. or just under $27,000 increase or 3.2%. Community development.
Oh, I have a question. To you, Mr. Chair. The 4.4% CPI for economic development, what date was that?
That was the May 31st, and actual CPI till that point was 4.7%. It decreased in June to 3.8%, so that's why there's a difference between economic development versus the tourism. It's just a timing thing.
Okay, thank you.
So community development, we changed how we did this budget a little bit from previous years. So operationally, one of our employees did resign during 2026. So we do have some savings as a result of one less employee, which would be savings in salaries and benefits, as well as some operational costs as a result of that. So rather than hire an additional employee, included in this budget is to use a contractor to provide some of those services that were being done by that employee. So it resulted in savings. And then we changed our method of accounting for how we're receiving the ESIC funding. And I'll go through that on the next page. So what you see in expenses is our salaries and benefits are down $92,000, but our professional services are up $70,000. So there's still some savings there, but the professional services is to use that third party to replace the employee and the work they were doing. The new line that we've added for 2027 is our CRSC initiatives. Now, these were always being done. It was just how we were actually recording. So if you look at 2026 budget, you can see ESIC grant in the revenue column of $10,535. That is the portion of the ESIC grant that we maintain within Capital Region Service Commission for the operating administration of doing these services. What we've chosen to do in 2027 is record the full amount of the ESIC grant, which is actually going to be $70,000, and then record the expense below of $60,000. So it results in the same net amount or similar, because the amounts of the contract do change year to year. But it allows us to use up some more RSSF. So you'll notice that RSSF funding has actually increased, which offsets the amount of member charges that we have to draw. So you'll see that there was decreases in the other operating expenses, administration expenses, as we do have one less employee. So although it shows that total expenses went up $25,000, the $60,000 was already there, it just wasn't showing up. So we've actually decreased this budget when you compare apples to apples. And I know that's confusing. On the revenue side of things, so we have that ESIC grant that's now recorded gross rather than net. We have RSSF, which is increased to $172,000. Our second previous year surplus is up to $21,000, meaning our member charges are actually reduced to $80,154.
Okay, does that 70,000 reflect any change in ESA's allocations in other budget areas? So transportation and others are still there.
Yeah, this is solely the money that we receive for community development. So for regional transportation, actually I need to change this description because I was talking to Brett before, but we've increased the budget for investigation of options as a result of the transportation study. So we're still looking at how we're going to implement some of these things from the transportation study, and we thought it would be wise to increase the budget to allow for that exploration. We do have less corporate service expense allocation, and we are using our reserve funds because it is overfunded, which allows us to eliminate the amount of member fees that we have to charge. So you will be paying, if this budget is approved, nothing for regional transportation in 2027. And because that fund is so overfunded, we expect that that can probably continue for a number of years should the board so choose that. So, starting with expenses, we've increased professional services by 20,000, so that is a budget of 106,000. You have your non-refundable HST of 4,500. Our allocation from corporate services went down by 3,400. So overall, that budget is 167,000, or an increase of 17,000. On the revenue side, we have RSSF, which funds 50% of those costs. So even though we're increasing the budget by 20,000, 10,000 is paid for from RSSF. We do get our ESIC grant for transportation, that's 50,000. If we transfer from the operating reserve 19,749, that allows us to eliminate the member charges. And so that's why you see 0 member charges, which went 27.
Questions, maybe questions for Brett. And this is one I really should know the answer to, but sometimes the memory back to last April isn't as good as it should be. So has the board actually received the transportation study yet?
No.
Didn't think we had. So that could become a question during this budget discussion.
If I could, Mr. Chair, I mean, it is ready to go. It was just the way that the timing worked with municipal elections flowing in the budget cycle. So our plan would be to present that through the Community Development Transportation Committee and flow that up to the board sometime in the fall.
It might be nice if they were synchronized. I don't expect any issue. It's not a huge budget, and most of the funding comes from external, but it will seem to be out of line with processing it a little bit.
Right, that brings us to public safety. Again, a very small budget. We have included an increase for a potential policing study for the region. This was based on feedback from board members that they'd be interested in this. So that's why we've included an amount in professional services. So on the expense side of things, you can see we have a small amount for administration. And then the professional services were increased to 35,000 from 5,000 in the previous year. Our allocation from corporate services is down almost 3,000, so the total budget for 2027 would be 97, just under 98,000, or a $27,000 increase. Again, due to that potential study. On the expense side of things, the RSSF, again, that would cover 50% of our costs, so that's just under 49,000. Our second previous year surplus was pretty consistent at 3,000. Meaning the member charges would be $45,958. So that is the one area of the newer services where we did include an increase. The rest, I would say, is pretty much just inflationary. All right. Sport, recreation, and cultural infrastructure. Again, that is one of the funds where we are proposing to take an amount from the operating reserve to bring it in as the operating reserve is overfunded. But this would deplete the operating reserve to be in that target level, so it would not be available for future years. On the expense side of things, it's pretty consistent. We have our 60,000 for professional services, 94,000 for corporate service allocation, so total budget of 154,000. Pretty much the same as previous years. RSSF funds 50% of 77,000. Our second previous year surplus was 10,000. The transfer from operating reserves would be 10,000. Again, if we had left that alone and not put anything in the operating reserve, the second previous year surplus would have been 20,000. So we're accomplishing the same thing. It's just at the discretion of the board. Meaning member charges will actually go down to $56,566, or a decrease of just under 12,000.
As much as I love to break my own rules, you know, so do we have targeted activities in this area during this that you're aware of coming into this budget?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. With that would be the continuation of our work on the trails in terms of the green and blue trail system. Within that will be other areas that are identified by the committee and recommended to the board, approved by the board, to bring forward. This has been a consistent pattern that we followed since 2023 in this area, because some years we deplete that fund or come very close, and some years we don't use all of the funding. We're very, as you can see, we're very conscious about the funding, where it comes from, and the responsibility with that funding. But in that, there's also work being done at the time that may continue into the next year. That'll be a decision of the board into the fall, but that's around recreation and service agreements in the region, for the entire region. And so those two alone could easily deplete that professional service funding. So,
Thank you very much.
All right, so that brings us to the page everybody's interested in. What's it gonna cost? So these, for the budgets that we've just looked at, this is what the total would be. So the third column from the left, right, would be what the member charges are for 2027. So total would be $2,034,000 compared to $2,029,000 in the previous year, which is an increase of $46,057. Now, what you're gonna see is some municipalities actually, they decrease and some they increase. And if you're wondering why that is, it has to do with how much your tax base grew from 2025 to 2026. If it grew faster than other municipalities, you'll have an increase. If it grew less, you'll have a decrease, because it's based on share of the tax base. So when we determine fee allocation, tourism promotion and economic development is based 100% on your share of the tax base. All of the other services are based 50% on your share of the tax base, 50% on your share of the population. There's been no changes to population since the last census, so that does not impact 2027's budget. So you can find your specific municipality and see what that means to you. All right, move on to planning and development. So I'm gonna let Lonnie speak to specifically the new position that's in this budget, which is really what's driving the increase that you're seeing. So as you can imagine, planning and development is a service. So 75% of the expenditures in the budget consist of salaries and benefits. Included in 2027's budget is one additional position, which is a building inspector. It also, the budget reflects the increase in the rental costs for that additional space that was taken on. We're using a firm to complete a rural plan that's required to be completed, but that's being paid for through reserve funds. So that's an in and an out, and there's really no impact on the bottom line of the budget. There is additional corporate service expense allocation, and we are using RSSF to pay for new costs in the planning and development division. So 50% of the costs that we added last year are being funded through RSSF. And the building inspector, 50% of that cost is also being funded through RSSF. So it's not fully borne by the participating members. And I'll just ask Lonnie to speak to the need for the building inspector.
Thank you, Mary Kay. With respect to the new building inspector, I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. I've been kind of putting the word out for a few months now that was coming. Our work is getting driven by the province and changes to the National Building Code. When we look at the National Building Code, we used to, for years, we looked at structural safety and life safety. A few years ago, they put in a energy efficiency component, and everybody, oh, that's not a big deal. Well, it turns out it is kind of a big deal. There's a lot of time devoted to ensuring the energy efficiency component of the code has been met. Our building permit numbers have stayed consistent. Our handy building permits, so our Carlisle Road, our Killarney and Lincoln, they're gone. We don't have the close ones. All of our permits now, we're traveling further to do, and it takes more time. So the need for the additional building inspector is so that we can keep up with the workload that's kind of put on us. If anyone's got some specific questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Questions for Lonnie?
Thanks, Lonnie.
I do have one quick one. I know his answer, I'm pretty sure. So as we get through this, the fees on that we receive dependent on what we choose to charge. Right?
Yes.
So some communities look at those this year and consider whether they should increase them or not. And I think the feedback in general has always been that we struggle enough to get people to stay within the rules that we create, and permits and everything when we do. So that fee structure should be looked at marginally.
The province has a proposal in the works with respect to fees. And not that it's an increase or decrease, it's calculation. So right now, the cost of your building permit is based on the estimated cost of construction. So don't include your driveway, your septic, or your well. And what I might estimate a house to cost for Lonnie to build may be less than it costs, Jason to build. And you'll get a bit of discrepancy. The province is looking at putting in a square meter charge, so that, if your house is 20 by 40 and it's 1 story, it's so much per square meter, and that's what your fee is. If it's a industrial complex or church, the fee will be different, and that's basically to recover the cost of the inspections per the particular building.
Thanks.
Right, so for planning and development, I'm gonna start at revenue because it's a bit of a bigger budget, jumping all over the place. If we start with other revenue, that's a budget of 8,000. That's our blue plate sales, the numbers that you receive. That's down slightly, that's why the decrease. Our RSSF is increased because we are claiming additional funding for the increased spending in 2026, particularly related to that new position. We're funding 50% of that with RSSF. We have our transfer from operating reserve of 60,000. That matches the expense that you'll see below of 60,000 under professional services. That's to have a rural plan completed by an engineering firm, as we do not have the staff to be able to meet that requirement in the time that it has to be done. And our second previous year surplus is pretty consistent with previous years. So overall, the budget for planning and development is 2,892,000. 2.5 of that would come from the participating members, or an increase of just under 201,000. That represents 3.75 cents on the tax base compared to 3.56 cents in the previous year. For administration expenses, the total administration expense budget is just under 730,000. That's an increase of 97,000. What's driving that would be our increased salaries and benefits. That's a CPI adjustment. We have the increased professional services for that rural plan, and we have the rent expense, as I mentioned, that's up 23,000. For our building inspection, we have a budget of $728,000, an increase of $159,000. That's being driven by the additional employee, as well as the CPI adjustment for the staff that are already here. Planning and development, total budget is $1,214,000, an increase of just under $70,000. That's again due to adjustments that were made to those employees during 2026, as well as the 3% CPI adjustment for 2027. For planning advisory service, that would be our PRAC. The meeting costs are down, whereas the per diem is up slightly, and they would also get a CPI adjustment. So total budget of $20,393. The allocation from corporate services is up $12,600 to just under $199,000, meaning the total budget again $2,892,000, or a 13% increase. The next page shows what that would cost the participating members. So again, these costs are allocated based on your share of the tax base. So you can see it's increases across the board. If you have a larger tax base, obviously your share is larger. Total increase of $200,000.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I hate to have to ask this question, but the RSSF funding, is there room for that to go anywhere else in any of the other budgeted items? Or is this what's left over can flow into planning and development? Because the reason I asked that, there's 3 facilities not, or 3 members not participating in this, and will we get pushback from that?
That is always the challenge with using RSSF funding, but we are capped out at claiming 50% of RSSF in this budget, so.
So all the other ones they're capped out,
All matched.
and if we didn't use this in planning
It would
and
have,
development, we would lose it.
we would have 3 years to be able to use it on something. And at that point, they can draw backwards.
I think it's a good question, David, and it's something that we have to consider could be at risk going forward if there were other substantial changes on the programming side that used up that fund. Currently, though, we also have $500,000 sitting in the trail connector that is not necessarily reflected here, or isn't reflected here because it currently doesn't have any matching revenue to go with it. And I'm assuming that comes into play only when the matching revenue arrives, and we take.
But we pulled that down 300,000 from last year, correct? Wasn't it 800,000 last year? That we couldn't fund to get that?
That was cumulative.
Hmm.
The 800,000 would have been cumulative, so beginning in 2024.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So-
this year we're left up at what's unused.
So we don't have our final RSSF allocation. We're still waiting on that. They've indicated that it will be very similar. Under this budget, we're using 2.686. And last year in 2026, we used just under 2.5. So we are using more than we had in the previous year's budget.
It remains a risk going forward, that funding, and even today we hear the Premier musing about further reductions. So anything like that can become a target. We hope not, but and I would think that the more it's used, the more it's utilized, and the more it accomplishes good things, then there's less likelihood that we would lose that funding. Certainly if there are large surpluses sitting around the province from service commission to service commission, it will put that fund at risk going forward.
Right, that brings us to our solid waste. So what you're gonna see in this budget is a proposed tipping fee increase of $3. If you were around last year when we looked at this, we had said we're probably gonna be in the range of $4 to $5 going forward. So I'm happy to report that we're able to come in at 3. I think that was really good news. We were happy as staff to be there. Looking forward for the next 4 years, I think we're gonna be in that $3 to $4 increase range annually to get that reserve fund to where we need to be and be in that position to fund those cell costs as well as the infrastructure improvements. We've reduced our estimated garbage tonnage. So in the last couple of budgets, we've been using 86,000 tons. We are not seeing that in the past couple of years. So we've reduced that estimated tonnage to 84,000 for this budget. I think it's more accurate than what we're seeing for 2026 year to date. We've increased our construction and demolition tonnage by 2,000. So that's increased from 7,000 to 9,000 because that seems to continue to grow. One thing, and it's just a change to a rate, but CFC disposal, and that's like your refrigerant, when you bring like a fridge or a freezer into the landfill, we charge a fee. We also pay the exact same fee to someone to come to dispose of that chemical appropriately. So right now it's $32 that we're charging, and he charges us $32. We know that that cost is gonna go up. So we're proposing that the board approve a rate of $35 per unit, and we will be charged the same. So it's an in and an out, but you'll have to approve that fee change. Our recycling facility is processing increased material, so that means more money coming in on that contract. So that's reflected in the budget. We're continuing to build up those reserve funds. So overall, to the solid waste budget, there's an increase of 165,000 or 1.5%. This is largely driven by equipment costs, which we'll talk about when we get into the actual numbers. Maybe I'll let Brett just talk about what he sees coming down the pike for solid waste, so you hear from him.
Sure, yeah, and Mary Kay, I think I can project my voice from here and everybody can hear fine, but so we do have a few drivers that are pushing our, really dictating what we have to contribute to our reserve funds over the coming years to avoid a rate shock. One of the large ones is a Baylor building construction project. So we've got to increase the capacity of our existing facility. It was designed in the mid-80s for an operation that was probably half of the tonnage of what we process today. We've got a new baler and a number of things planned on going in there, and that's probably going to have a price tag of around $10 million. That's expected in about 2031. I expect we might do some groundwork in 2030. Beyond that, I think the big obviously there's an element of the unknown circulating around organics. We've spoken about that in the past. I'm sure we'll speak about it again in the near future. And then the big known cost that's coming our way is future cell development. So Mary Kay, you alluded to it earlier in your presentation, but essentially once we get done piggybacking cells, so building up on top of additional cells, we've got to go back to doing full geomembrane liner systems. Additionally, it's around the periphery, so we've always filled in the center of our site. The new cells are going to be on the edge, and we're required to have a 4-to-1 side slope, which means that your cost per ton disposed goes up. We build 2-year cells. You need a bigger footprint if you're losing that geometry on your side slope. So that's the big driver on the cell cost increase. And we're trying to keep that down as low as possible. There's also significant excavation work, so it's about 2.5 cubic kilometers worth of clay needs to be excavated out for those cells to go in. We've been working hard at that, and by going up top, getting that environmental impact assessment approval to go up higher has bought us about, probably 10 years of excavation work that we can do with our own forces rather than bringing in private contractors. So it's been a successful strategy, but those are the main drivers for the reserve fund contributions.
Thanks, Brett.
Just a quick question. So when we, last year, as we were talking about increasing the fee on a regular basis going forward, the tonnage that we were using was the tonnage that we were estimating then. It's been a small reduction now, and I guess that probably wouldn't have a huge impact on that, but it would have some impact on the number as well. So the 103 that we're looking at this year may not be as efficient if the tonnage goes down. And now we're seeing circular materials moving to the twice a month pickup in most communities, I think, or all communities. And we're all hoping that the tonnage goes down as a result of that. So, except here, we have to hope maybe the tonnage goes up, you know, so makes the numbers better. So.
It's a double-edged sword. I think one of the main drivers too on our tonnage decrease, obviously, is an indicator of economic activity in the region. There was a lot of construction, there was a lot of economic activity following COVID. That was sort of a bit of a distortion, I would say. One of the other main drivers, and Mary Kay noted the change in our C&D tonnage, so that's construction and demolition tonnage, sort of corresponds, doesn't it, to our garbage tonnage decrease. We made a policy change a number of years ago on gyprock drywall. When you landfill it, it produces hydrogen sulfide gas. It's mostly sulfur compound, gyprock. And so, and that's really corrosive, and it impacts our output on our power plant. So we started diverting that to C&D and banning it from the landfill. And I think we're seeing an impact here on tonnage. However, we're also realizing better than expected revenues on the power production side. So that's the full picture.
Any questions?
So we'll start with revenues. So our regular garbage, this is based on 84,000 tons at $112. So a $3 increase, decrease of 2,000 tons results in 9.4 million. The C&D, that rate would remain the same at $45. We did increase that last year. And the estimated tonnage would be 9,000, up from 7,000. Our recycling revenue is up 84,000, and that has to do with the current level of recycling tonnage. We get a fee per ton that we process, and tonnage has been higher than expectations, so that's good news on that front. The increase in other revenue is due to the amount of asbestos waste that we've been receiving. So that's up almost 18,000. The RSSF that we use and we claim here, that relates to the additional charge that solid waste took on when we changed the allocation of corporate services. So that's an offset for charging solid waste more. We were able to claim the additional rent of this facility and what solid waste portion was. And then our second previous year surplus was up 89,000 to 342. So overall, the budget for solid waste is 11,824,000, or a 2.8% increase. Expenses are actually not up 2.8%. We'll see that. On the expense side of things, our salaries and benefits, it does reflect a CPI adjustment, but we have changed the processing in our recycling facility, so that's allowed a reduction in our sorting staff. So we're able to reduce our salaries and benefits by 95,000 in 2027's budget. Our maintenance costs are down to a budget of 1.452 million. And the reason for that is in LGM, which stands for landfill gas maintenance, 2026 included a pipe extension project. So that's not continuing in 2027's one-time cost. And our household hazardous waste, our contract was up and that's been renegotiated, and it resulted in additional costs as a result of that. On the equipment side of things, we have a budget of 1,278,000. The equipment cost tends to fluctuate depending on the life cycle of the equipment. So included in maintenance and repairs is redo of a bucket on one of our pieces of equipment, as well as tire purchases, which, as you can appreciate, these big pieces of equipment, it's nothing for it to be $30,000 for tires for one of those pieces of equipment. So it was not included in 2026 budget. It needs to be done in 2027. The 2027 budget is pretty consistent with where 2025's budget was. The fuel, as you know, diesel prices are not cheap these days, so that's reflected into what we're actually seeing, and the actual liters that each of the different pieces of equipment consume. For our baler costs on the next page, we actually have some savings. So our wire and our maintenance costs are down just based on the actuals. So that's a savings of 61,000 for a budget of 534,000. The waste diversion, the 84,000, that's the CFC disposal, that refrigerant that I talked about. So that's the revenues cover those expenses. So despite the increase there, it's offset by what we would charge the customer that's bringing in the unit. And then on the administration side of things, we have a budget of 1,476,000. That's up 102,000 from the previous year. And if you look up, you'll see pretty much everything has been adjusted to reflect what we're actually spending. Specifically with regard to engineering services, we try to adjust that every year based on the actuals. So that's why you see the increase of 36,000 there, and then some savings towards the bottom. Our debt servicing, so this would be our principal and interest repayments on any debentures that we have outstanding. That increased 95,000 in 2027's budget. And the reason for that is we actually did not issue a debenture in 2025. So we had some savings in 2026 budget, and now it's getting back up to the levels that it usually is. Our post-closing costs, so that is the transfer that we have to make into our investments so that the funds are there when the landfill closes. And that's based on an engineering report, how much per ton we have to put aside. That amounts to 13,000 in 2027's budget. For capital expenditures, so this is capital that would be paid for from operations. And what we typically do is equipment that's under 100,000, we tend to pay that through operations. If it's over 100,000, we go to the Municipal Capital Finance Corp and get a debenture. So what's included in this capital purchases, and I have a slide on this, would be our site paving, which we do every year. The purchase of 3 used site vehicles, which would be pickup trucks, and 2 plows to plow the facility down there. And then you have your 100,000 for cell expansion, which again is piggybacking on top of those current cells that we already have the geomembrane liner that Brett talked about. So overall, our capital expenditures paid for through operations is down to 430,000 from the previous year. The transfer to reserves, again, we're trying to build up those reserves. So every year, the more we can put away, the more it's going to save us in the long term. So our operating reserve transfer for this budget would be 75,000. The capital reserve transfer would be 850,000, or an increase of 157,500 total. Our allocation from corporate services is up to 811,000. Again, that is offset by regional services support funding. So the total budget, 11,824. It's showing an increase of 2.8, but when you consider that we're actually transferring 157.5 to the reserve funds, that's not actually an expense because it's going into a savings account. The expenses are actually up 165,000 or 1.5%. So what does that mean for the various municipalities? As I mentioned, 40% of our tonnage comes from the member communities and municipalities. The other 60% comes from industrial, commercial, institutional sector. So what we do is we estimate what your annual tonnage is based on historically what the municipalities have brought in. This is not what you will actually pay. You will pay based on what you actually bring to the landfill. So if it's less than this, you'll pay less than this. If it's more, you would pay more. But this is the estimate that we have based on where you are at this point in our records. So what you can see in the last column to the right is the estimated effect of a $3 increase. That's the additional fee that you would pay for 2027. Next slide. So as I mentioned, these are the capital projects that would be paid for from operations. So we have 125,000 for paving at the site, 3 used site vehicles, and then 2 truck plows. For
Go ahead.
for capital equipment that would be financed, which would be through the Municipal Capital Finance Corporation. We have an excavator, which is these are both replacement pieces of equipment. An excavator and a loader, estimated costs of $400,000 each. And this is required disclosure that I have to sign off that the board is aware of this, but the impact of borrowing $800,000 for this capital equipment purchase is estimated to be $3,100 in 2027's budget. And then going forward, as you repay the principal and interest, it would be $182,000 per year for the next 5 years.
So are both of those purchases are all, I guess, looking forward, we have a capital reserve because we have some issues. Typically, a purchase like this would be somewhat offset in operating or year-to-year cost because we would have been replacing equipment that we had previously been paying for. Is that the situation?
Exactly, so we typically have a new debenture issued every year. So one gets retired and one gets brought in. But the reason you're seeing the increase in the cost that I showed you is because we took a break in 2025 and we said, oh, we can make this a piece of equipment last longer. So we did not replace it. So that's exactly, you got it. All right.
One more question, I'm sure. So the long-term projections, the Baylor building, again, just maybe my memory, but I'm certain that it was included in the numbers that we would have been looking at in the future, along with the cell.
Yes, that would have been covered in our, Mary Kay gave the presentation with the recommendation on revised reserve funding levels, I believe. Yeah, so that was absolutely factored in.
I don't know if you remember, but we had like a little graph of how old each piece of equipment was and estimate.
I remember thinking we're okay.
We just gotta prepare, we're okay, we're prepared. All right, we're at the last budget, so generation facility. This budget's a little bit different, there are no member fees, it's self-sustaining. So we are required though by the province to produce balanced budgets. So any surplus that we are budgeting for, you see a line that says transfer to reserve. So the budgeted transfer to reserve in 2027 is $589,000. That's really what we're estimating that the generation facility will generate. So that's our surplus. But because it has to be a zero at the end of the day, we just say we're going to transfer everything into our reserve fund. The reason that it's higher than it was in the previous year is our maintenance expenses are down as there's no regularly scheduled maintenance interval in 2027. So the engines at certain hourly, like once they reach a certain number of hours, there's scheduled maintenance that has to occur. That's being 20,000, 40,000, and then 60,000, which is a complete engine block swap. We did that a couple years ago. We borrowed for it. We completed our 20,000 in the last couple years, I believe. And so we have an off year in 2027, which means we should generate more money, which we can then put to the to the capital reserve to be used when we do a complete block swap again in about 2030.
Or convert to LNG, yes.
Sorry?
Or switch over to LNG.
But yeah,
Yeah, the cycle continues
the
every
cycle continues.
every
But
20,000 hours.
so we're putting those funds away so we can use them responsibly in the future. All right, so the budget looks like for revenues, for generation revenue, the total budget, so that's the power that we sell to NB Power. Total budget of $1,345,000. We've reduced it slightly because 2026 year to date is down a bit. So we wanted it to reflect the actual production. Our second previous year surplus was $106,000. So total budget of $1,451,000. As I talked about, our maintenance and repair costs are down, so that's down to $300. The operation expenses are down slightly due to decrease in oil costs, and so total operational costs are $462,000. Admin expenses are down to 34,000. We have our debt servicing, so we do have 2 debentures which were issued for the 60,000 hour block swap that we did a few years ago. We have 2 to 3 more years on those until they'll be retired. Our allocation from corporate services is 54,000. And then, as I mentioned, that transfer to Generation Capital Reserve Fund is 589,000. That's really what we expect the facility to generate in 2027. So the last slide that I have, this was a new schedule that we produced last year, I believe, or the year before. It's really a one-pager that allows board members to look and say, okay, what is, why is the budget growing? Where is it coming from? This is really what tells you. So what you can see here, our budget for 2027 is 21,564,000. That's up 954,000 from the previous year, but 451,000 of that is because of reserve fund transfers, specifically the large one in power generation, which is a surplus, so we take that out. So if you want to know what actually the increase is to expenses for 2027, it's 502,000. That is a 2.5% increase versus actual CPI of 3.8%. If you want to know how we're paying for all of that, that's where you see those changes in revenue. So our SSF is paying for 187,000 of that. Your member charges for the newer mandated services, the planning and development, as well as the tipping fee, that amounts to about 32% of this increase that the municipalities are paying for. The other is all coming from other sources of revenue or increased funding. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Pretty small increase overall.
We'll try. Tried really hard.
I think we going forward though, we do aware of the 2 primary risks that built into this process, and they're kind of tied together for me. I don't anticipate that we're going to see the Regional Services Support Fund disappear. It's there and it's in legislation, and however, it's always a risk if a government starts to tinker with it or reduce it or create new rules around it, that sort of thing. And that's where our operational reserves bring some comfort. At least they're a little bit of a buffer if you go through a year with major changes or reductions and give the communities time to react and respond to that. That's just something that we've got to keep our eye on and be aware that it could come at us in a way we don't expect, because governments are being pushed in ways that they don't expect it to be pushed. And in the next few months, that could get even more significant than it is. But we're in good shape, and I think it's any just as reflections from the committee that what we would like to see in some of the next discussions we have, or
I'm very confident in what we've been presented here today. I think it works well.
which municipality is the solid waste division in?
You're entirely located within the city of Brandon.
So that 132,000 goes back to the city.
It's not for me to comment.
Let's not
I was just- It's property tax, and I was just noting that it's 132,000.
I'll prefer that.
Mr. Chair.
Sir?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, to the members, thank you for your time today. I also want to thank all of our team. As you can see, Mary Kay and her team worked exceptionally hard on this budget and presentation here today, and budget drafting it. And each of the management members that you see here today have worked with their teams to bring forward what we felt was fair and adequate to do the job that we are mandated to do. And if there are questions, as we said, please try to get them in as early as possible so that we can have the responses back to you or responses developed for the next meeting. And I believe, Kelly, our next meeting is tentatively
The 19th.
the 19th. Is already scheduled in your, it's in your, it should be in your calendars already, and if not, it will be immediately following. And we hope that you'll let us know after you have a period of time to reflect what those questions may be, what your concerns may be. And we'll keep track of that as the chair had said, or Mr. Chair, you had said, to let the others know when we start to enter into committee of the whole. So it'd be nice if we can respond to those questions at the next meeting and stay focused on answering any questions and responding to the needs of the the committee, and then of course to the board. And just a reminder, as Mary Kay had said in her front end of her presentation, this is by consensus that we move forward. So it doesn't mean that we have to have unanimity, but it would be good to have as much consensus as possible across the board. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Questions?
Any questions we have, we direct to you, Richard, or we direct to John?
Ken or to Joe?
Both.
You can just copy both of us, and I won't do anything.
They'll go directly to Mary Kay, Mr. Chair. Just like-
I think that, as all of us are sitting around our municipal tables in the next few weeks, we're in a situation where we don't know what our future exactly looks like. We know what our budget needs are, and we'll be all able to generate a budget. We just don't know what the province is going to hand down to us in terms of rate structure and all of that. So I think holding the line this year as much as absolutely possible and will be much appreciated in that whole process. So said we're all going to strike the beginning of a budget, and then if we haven't already started that in the next few weeks, it's easy to predict what we're going to spend. It just isn't currently easy to predict where the money's going to come from. So appreciate it. That's it. A motion for adjournment would be in order.
Motion to adjourn, Dave Morrison.
Second.
Second.